Now, when we're examining these pathways, what we've been trying to do over the past few decades, not only to figure out the steps, but to also figure out where the steps came from. We find that evolutionarily, the steps are conserved for humans, they're conserved for the great apes, the hominids like us, the great apes, and then, the monkeys, the apes, and then as you branch out more and more into the mammals, you see that the pathways are there, but they're slightly bit different. Pathways are there when you start looking at different types of animals, insects, reptiles. They have their own versions of the pathways, their own steps. So what we've tried to do, or are trying to do, is to figure out where they came from. This allows us to not only study the pathways in us, because it's hard, because there's lots of pathways that overlap, that intersect, that share the same steps. And if we can go to, a different animal that's not quite as advanced evolutionarily as we are, and if we could pick apart the pathways in it, it gives us a foundation to start building upon, to start figuring out the pathways in us. When you look at these pathways, as I talked about, you have the anabolic, which is at the top. The anabolic pathway takes 2 subunits or more subunits, and through a series of steps, joins them together. The bottom, catabolic. Catabolic takes the big things, breaks them down, makes the subunits now available. As I said at the beginning of the lecture of this chapter, when we're talking energy here, we're not discussing this in the terms of electricity. We're talking about energy and the ability to do work. Since high school, you've heard, 2 terms when it comes to energy: kinetic and potential. Kinetic is things in motion, energy at work. Potential is energy stored. Kinetic energy is the building of the breaking down process. The potential is the energy in the bonds. Now, here in biology, we're going to find 2 types of energy. 2 types are going to be responsible for. 2 types that we're going to be discussing, well, basically throughout the rest of the semester. It's going to come up in different ways. The first is gradients. Last chapter we talked about active and passive transport. Passive let things go from high concentration down to low concentration. The molecules just seem to move. Okay, it was just a natural state of matter. Active transport, take stuff at a low, pump it up to high. Pump, took energy, move it across that membrane. Talked about the fact that you can end up with electrochemical gradients. More of charged particles, one type of charged particles on one side of a membrane versus the other. More positives over here, more negatives on this side. Well, positive battery, or negative, positive. Sounds like a battery. So by setting up this differential, as they refer to it, pumping things from low to high concentrations, You literally set up the ability for things to work. Kind of like in the last slide. All that water behind the dam. It's held there. Concentration of water on one side versus the other side. As the water flows through the dam, that's kinetic energy. We're going to see the same thing here in the next this chapter and the next. As electrons, as hydrogens flow across the membrane through channels, it's going to allow for kinetic energy to be turned into number 2, the one at the bottom here. Whoops, here. Chemical energy. Chemical energy in the bonds. Takes energy to make the covalent bond, thus when you break it, you get some of that energy back.